Welcome to Shamanic Voices, a profound journey into the heart of shamanism, led by a seasoned practitioner with over 40 years of experience and his journeyman. Join us as we learn how this ancient wisdom can help you navigate your modern life. I'm Brian Nolan, your host, a journeyman Tetia, and with me now is your co-host, Georg Breckman, a shaman Tetia. Georg, how are you doing today?
Very good, Brian. Looking forward to sharing some things with the audience that we haven't shared previously. And above all, loving the fact that we have this new video format here on YouTube. So any of you who are listening to us purely in audio format, remember you can go look up Teutonic Healing, and we have a whole page there on YouTube where you can find our videos, including this one.
Absolutely. I've been hearing some great feedback from people on the quality, as well as just getting to put a face to the voices. So
that does help.
So today I believe we are going to talk about the runes. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. You know, throughout man's history, we've always wanted to know what the heck is coming next. You know, what's happening in our futures, and what do even present events, present circumstances actually mean? What's the deeper understanding of it? Well, runes have been made out of all kinds of things, in case any of you in the audience are wondering what they are. This set that I have is made out of Douglas fir from the west coast of America. And this is the rune Now These, which we're going to cover in just a moment. And there's a light side and there's a dark side. This is only important as far as casting them, which we will be doing a rune casting in a future episode, just to show you how that goes. And the important thing I'm going to cover today is what each one of the runes means. The runes are, well, I mean, there are different ways to forecast things or to do divination. This is the whole idea of divination. You can use a pendulum where you're holding it and it's going this way or that way, or circling clockwise or counterclockwise and giving an answer to what you ask. But that's a narrow range of answers. It may be likely, unlikely, no, yes. Very limited. The runes, on the other hand, give you a wide range of very nuanced pieces of information, as does a tarot deck, for example. There are many forms of very good divination available. And this I love because it is very nuanced. And when we cast the runes, we even see sentences or phrases forming before us on the casting board. Again, we'll have to just demonstrate this for you to get a better idea. But for now, today, we're just going to cover what the individual runes are, the sacred sounds of the runes. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the idea of the Hindi chant Om Mane Padme Hum. Well, imagine if you had 33 sacred sounds just as deep as that, just as resonating. And I'm actually going to not just say them, like I said, that I'll say them and I'm going to resonate them so you can hear how it would be used to vibrate your vagal neural system, which is to innervate you and to raise your vibration spiritually. So I'm going to begin with the meaning of the rune, and then I'm going to chant it for you.
And I want to make a suggestion to people. When he does read the runes, when he breathes the runes, close your eyes and listen to it so you can feel that in your body.
Excellent suggestion, Brian. Here's the first one. Now These. Now These is the rune of necessity. All of the runes are actually ideograms. The pictures represent something in reality. So this represents the fire starter, where you would have a little wooden bowl at the top, a little bowl at the bottom, and you'd have a stick with a bow on it, the bow drill, and the bow drill is turning one piece of wood against the other. And when it gets hot enough, you put some tinder on there and you start a fire. So this is a rune of necessity, because what could be more important to human life than fire? So the rune is Now These. Now These. And once we've raised the question of necessity, how do we then answer that necessity? Well, through the work that we do, through what we do to contribute to other people and to the commerce of the world. And for this, the craftsman would wear an apron. And you would see the tools hanging from the apron, the sash going across the shoulders, tied around the waist, this being the waist sash. And the name of this is Ayr, Y-R. So I'm saying Ayr, but when I chant it, it's Ayr. So Ayr represents the work that we do, our accomplishments in response to necessity. Another basic of human life is, of course, reproduction. So we have to represent that. Bjarkan. Bjarkan is the rune of sacred motherhood. So we represent the female form with the breasts and the belly gravid or expectant. Bjarkan. And next we have the rune of the magical gift, which is not necessarily just the physical gift giving, but the gift of one's inheritance, the gift of one's wit, let's say, that goes through the family line, the gift of one's culture and how it enlivens your life and so on. And this we call gebo. And if you're wondering why this would represent a gift, in the old days, this would be taking a large piece of leather or parchment and putting something you want to give as a gift in it, and then tying the four corners together. So imagine a rectangular piece with strips attached to it, and you would tie the strips together, thereby cinching the gift together and covering it, so it could be seen then later by the recipient. Gebo. Gebo. And next we have truly the rune of man, literally. As I said, the runes tell the human story. And this is the rune Manaz, hence the word man in English, M-A-N-N-A-Z. And Manaz, as the rune of man, is the rune of really kind of communication between people, of human community. So what does this human community mean? Well, the signification here is one person is sitting with their spine erect, looking at another person with their spine erect. Their gaze is looking downward at about 45 degrees toward the solar plexus of the other person as their gazes cross at just a few feet difference. And this actually is a meditative posture. You are kind of psychically exchanging information with the person who sits opposite you. And you're both raising your state meditatively. Maybe one person has a bit of trouble meditating. Oddly enough, when you do this, it helps to quiet what the Buddhists would call the monkey mind of one and bring them into a meditative alignment with the other as far as being available to higher wisdom. So we call this manas. Manas. And next we have the rune of one of the most basic forms of construction in the ancient northern world. I say, what does that have to do with this rune? It just looks so geometric. Well, it does indeed. And this is a rune of shelter, Elhaz, which means shelter, a sanctuary. And so sanctuary is signified by the load-bearing vertical pole, and from it come two at 45 degrees supporting poles which go out to a lintel that goes across the top, a common form of construction found in the ancient world, in the ancient north. Again, the name of this rune is Elhaz. Elhaz. This rune is called Tiras. And yes, it corresponds in runic scripts with the letter T. All of these have a phonetic use as well, in case you're wondering. But this one specifically has its shape. It is the arrow of Tyr, the god of the North Star, god of purposiveness and warriorship. And so his arrow is pointing us always toward the North Star as our fixed purpose, the North Star of our determination, the star that throughout the long history of the peoples of the North, you could look at the North Star and it seemed not to move. Sometimes it was called the nail of the heavens. And why is it in this shape? Well, because there's one form, and a lot of these refer to a meditative practice of pointing your fingers at the North Star, and you visualize yourself bringing the light, the bluish light of the North Star, into your eyes. Now, when I first moved out here in the country where I live now, there was so little light pollution I can actually do that. Anymore, there's just so many street lights around that you can't really see the North Star very clearly. But I do recall standing in the backyard on a dark night and pulling in the blue fire, which was lovely, the blau feu of the North Star. And you can do it in a relatively dark environment wherever you happen to be in the Northern Hemisphere. So we call this rune, and there are alternate runes for it, like Tiu in Anglo-Saxon. This is the Northumbrian script of 33 runes that we're talking about here. So we're going to use the script that I learned in, and this is called Tiwas. Tiwas. Now again, in breathing the runes, this will look a little strange. This is Uruz, which would correspond with the letter U, but it's also the rune of strength. And why would it be the rune of strength? Because the person doing it is practicing Stadhura, the ancient predecessor to yoga, which the ancient Aryans, not meaning one people better than another or anything like that, they were simply the people coming from the West after the submergence of Helgoland Blight, of the civilization that was there off the coast of Denmark and Holland, in very ancient times, around, say, 2200 BCE. And they took this form of meditation with them. So what we have here is someone standing straight. He or she is bending over, touching the earth with their hands, pushing on it, hopefully with the palm flat. You have to be relatively flexible to do this, of course. Your legs straight, the legs being here, the hands being here, the torso being here. We don't have the head on this, but we can imagine it. And after pressing it, then we're pulling up as we stand up the Blaufur, the Sisu, the radiation from the earth, from Aka's realm, from the earth beneath us, hopefully standing on the earth barefoot to do so, and pulling it up into ourselves internally to strengthen ourselves spiritually and morally and physically. So we call this Uruz, the rune of strength. Uruz. And here we have another rune, which at first you might not quite grasp why it is. Why we'd call this the rune of communication. So we have here people communicating with each other, the rune of community. We have two horses stopped in the road, and their nozzles are almost touching as people stop, as they did in more leisurely, less hurried ancient times, as the passengers are speaking to each other at a stopping point in the road. And I remember growing up in a semi-rural society, stopping many a time and being in a hurry to get somewhere, and seeing one guy stopped with his vehicle with the window rolled down on the driver's side, talking to somebody else, stopped on the other side of a dirt road, no passing, with his window rolled down, and years later in learning the rules. So, this kind of survived intact in some places in rural America. And you just had to wait until they were through. You didn't want to be rude and interrupt them. It might be important gossip, who knows? But this represents the same thing in an ancient context, the rune of community. And we call this rune Ehwaz, E-H-W-A-Z. Ehwaz. And next we have one referring to the passage of time in our lives, the importance of the seasonal celebrations of our lives, Ukonkavat, for example, being the summer solstice, another being Yule, of course, the time when we have the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice, as opposed to the summer solstice when the day is the longest. And these seasonal festivities would be the markers of time. Well, what would this have to do with time? Well, in ancient times, you would put a pine knot, or what was called in the rural South, for example, or in Appalachia, a lighter knot, which would be the heart of the cedar or pine tree, which would burn for a very long time. Well, you didn't want the black sooty smoke to just get stuck on the wall right next to it, and you didn't want it to start a fire, so you would have a little nail sort of thing sticking out right here, a sharp iron spike, and you would drive the knot onto that and light it with another brand that was already burning, and you would set this sconce into the wooden wall of a hall or a home, and it would burn there for quite a long time. So this represented the passage of time. These didn't burn for a very long time, but while they were burning, it would represent time. And this is called Yera. And from the word Yera, an abbreviation would be Yer, which, you're right, sounds very similar to the word year, and may very well be where the year came from in the Anglo-Saxon, later becoming the modern English. The grandfather of both languages, of course, being Old Norse. So this is Yera, the passage of time and the observation of the seasons. Yera. Now, you might recall a few runes back. I'm going to go back to it just to give you a sense of reference and how the runes show the progression of what's happening in our lives. Remember that we had Bjarkan representing the woman Gravid, okay? Well, what happens after the delivery is the body, the womb opens and out comes the new life. So if you can picture this bottom figure opening up, and that's what would happen. So you might think of the gates swinging open, and out comes the new child to meet the world. So this one we know as Berdro, because as the child enters the world, he or she is given the gifts from the Sisters of Fate, Ure, Verdandi, and Skuld. And what are these gifts? Well, the gifts are the Hamiya, your guardian spirit that will guide you through your life. You, of course, are incarnating now with your Mansvilgya, your soul kernel, so to speak, that which rides with you through your various incarnations and which carries the memory of that. And you have to remind you and be your recording spirit also. This Mansvilgya remembers where you've been, what you've done, who you've known, and there's also the spirit of your kin, your kinsvilgya, which your family has brought to you, the accumulated wisdom of your family. Maybe they've all done the same thing for several generations, and there's an accumulated wisdom within your clan and your people, your wider tribe, whether maybe they're nomads, maybe they're agrarian peoples who cultivate quite well. Maybe they're crafting people, or maybe they're nautical people, whatever they are. Maybe they're scientific people. And this accumulated wisdom is capitulated forward into the newest generation. And this would, of course, be called epigenetics in the modern sense as we study it by biologists such as Rupert Sheldrake. In the olden times, we would call it Aitarsvilgya, or the non-physical inheritance of your greater people. So this rune we refer to, again, as Berdro, and it is guided by the Sisters of Fate. And if you turn it this way, we would also think of it whimsically as the dice cup of the Sisters of Fate, because people always felt like a lot of things that happen in life are a bit accidental or coincidental, so the fates would toss your fate and throw it out there to see which numbers come up on the dice, which is a very ancient form of divination indeed, and of gaming, of course, as well. So again, we know this is Berdro, and it's kind of a sound between the P and the B, a bit different than in modern languages. road. Now, of course, that new life, well, we would want him or her to be guided along the right path in life. And of course, as you might have guessed, this may well be the origin of the modern use in the Latin alphabet of the letter R. And in case you're wondering how old the runes are, runic inscription found in the pass between Austria and Italy that dated back to about 300 BCE, but we have far older runes, more expansive than the 33 that we have in the Northumbrian set. I don't recall how many were in the set, but it's quite a few, some of which we do not know what they mean, that were found in the Bosnian pyramids in Bosnia. And these date back to about 25,000 years ago when this was occupied, was used, these massive pyramid plaza there in Bosnia, and then later covered up. Archaeologists and a scientific team have now gone inside and found these inscriptions and others. So we refer to this as right. Now, why would this represent the right path forward, right way? So think about it, kind of use your imaginations again. I invite you to do that. Think of this as a head of a horse and this as the outstretched leg moving forward. So this is the progress forward, and we're hoping it's along the right path. So right, raido. So this is how we pronounce this one. Raido. So as we go forward in life, we're not just related to where we're going. We're also need to be shielded as we make our travels. And yes, I'm looking at the back of these because I have multiple notes on the back of them, which help me to give you a fuller picture. And so we think of ourselves as sometimes needing a shield against adversity and against negativity. And if you think about ancient shields, they quite often had a figure such as this on the front of them. What does that mean? Well, it meant, for one thing, that you as an individual are grounding yourself as energetically belonging to multiple dimensions. You're rooted in the earth, you're rooted in the sky, that's the vertical. You're rooted in the present, you're rooted in the past. You're rooted in what you have learned and what you shall yet learn. And this is a great crossing point overlaid upon the vertical axis of your life. And we know this one as Ayor. Ayor. So here you're shielding yourself against adversity and negativity. Next, we have another rune of metaphysical origin. And this, if you turn it kind of the other way and think about it, looks a lot like the letter L to some extent, or the letter V in modern script. But this was used as the letter L, and it represents a basic facet of the life that we saw before us, the presence of ponds and lakes throughout the Nordic world. And certainly you look at, the topography, for example, of parts of Sverige or parts of Suomi, and you'll see many, many, many lakes, just like you would see in places where the Finns and Swedes decided to settle, like Minnesota or Wisconsin. So this is the rune of lake, lagu. Now, why would this be the rune of a lake? Well, because it represents your spine is straight, your vision is cast out upon the waters, watching them ripple at, say, about 45 to 60 degrees. And as you are looking out, it is a visual equivalent to what today we would refer to as white noise. Only it's the white noise that is in your visual field, which helps to still the voices inside and helps to bring your mind to clarity, or to what in the Orientals would call, in the Buddhist tradition or the Hindi tradition, dhyana, or absorption. Absorption, in this case, in the element. And of course, we would call this sitting outside in meditation, utsetning in the Norse. So we celebrate this rune as lagu. Lagu. Our next rune refers to, well, self-defense in the physical sense. How do we protect ourselves? The rune of protection. Well, possibly with a pickaxe. And of course, plants protect themselves too. How do they do it? Well, they protect themselves with thorns. And indeed, in Old Anglo-Saxon, this was known as thorn. And we know it in the Norse as durisas. It's correct to chant these in a number of dialects or languages because the runes were used by people in a wide arc going all the way from Iceland in the northwest, all the way through Scandinavia, the northern shores of the Baltic and the southern shores of the Baltic, like Denmark and part of Holland and ancient Deutschland, Germany, and the Baltic states, and all the way into Mother Russia, into Rodina. So here we have one of these runes that would have been very well known back then. Turisas, the rune of the pickaxe, the rune of personal physical protection. Turisas. Of course, to live on earth, well, we need abundance, we need prosperity, we need to be able to transact ourselves with others, and we need property. So how on earth would this rune stand for property? This rune is known as Fehu, the rune of abundance, of property, of possessions. Well, this is a stylization of the horns of the auroch, the ancient, very large, half-wild cattle that were preyed upon and to some extent domesticated by our ancestors in Northern Europe in the latter part of the Ice Age and the Bronze Age and so on. So that is how we know this is a rune of abundance, because abundance we measured not in coin a lot. This to some extent was going on, but not that much. The earliest designation would be how many flock or herd animals you owned, how much was in your harvest or in your granary. And again, this was one of the markers of wealth. Fehu. Fehu. And of course, life has accidents. It has drastic changes that are wrought upon us. And we can refer to such things as calamities or change agents or any way you want to look at them. In the ancient world, what we have said, we could call this hail, because what does hail do? It comes out of nowhere, seemingly, especially to ancient man, and it batters the roof that you just built. It, worse, can beat down the crops that you're growing, knock the fruit off your fruit trees. It can have all kinds of unintended consequences. Now, how would this represent hail or calamity or sudden and unwanted change? Well, it's an ancient gate, and part of the gate is drooped down and has fallen. So that represents this force of change, of entropy, of ruin to some extent. So hence we refer to it as Hagel. Hagel. Along with all of these things in our lives which change and are part of transience, it is good to reflect upon the fact that there are those beings and those levels of reality which do not change. And what are these? Well, these are the gods and goddesses and the sisters of fate, the Jotun, the forces, the blind forces of nature, and the personified forces of nature, and the 9 worlds outside of our own world, the other dimensions, which as we expand our minds, we can be in contact. So this reminds us of our contact with the other elements of our lives, the other beings who cohabit this space with us. And we call this Ansus, and it refers to the presence of the gods and goddesses in our lives and the way they bring meaning to our lives. And why would this represent that? Because it is a shaman or sorcerer, a priest or priestess, a godai, a gidia, Retietdaya, a goldersmaker, or a berender, a vitki, standing there, anchored to the earth, and aiming the arms of the fingers open toward the earth, pulling up the energy of the earth into his body, ready to cast it out into those whom he is healing or leading in spiritual exercise. So we know this as answers. Answers. And of course, one of the other elements in our lives is the sun. And the sun is an eternal fact of our existence and the giver of life. And so this element, this giver of life, is also a signifier of success, because if you didn't have the sun, well, you don't have what you steer by in your travel. You don't have what you raise your crops by, and what warms us. So if we kind of turn it this way, you might understand what it means. This is the person laying on his or her back. The hinge here of the hips, the top of the legs, the thighs this way, and the lower legs this way, pointed toward the sun. Again, this is to some extent a meditative or an observant rune. As I said, the runes are ideograms. They are representing things that we did in our daily lives or weekly lives, ways that we observe the seasons and the elements and the higher powers, but also higher dimensions of thinking. So how does this become Sawiyo? Or we could say it's, again, pronounced different ways in different cultures along this entire arc of Nordic culture, different languages, different peoples, whether they're Jutes or Danes or Finns or Karelians or Icelanders or Dutch or whoever they were, Norwegians, they would all be perhaps making the same observation. So you could call it Sigel, the rune of success, just as you could call the rune of victory Tiwaz, because you're pointing at victory, at pointedness, as you're pointing at the North Star. So this is the rune of success, Sigel. And I can pronounce the Sigel or Suyo. I'm going to use Sigel. That's just the one that I prefer. Sigel. And yes, it stands for the letter S. We have a very interesting rune here. This one, at first, might not be all that clear. What does AR mean? AR spelled like the English word ear, E-A-R. Well, this is the person coming home at the end of life's journeys, perhaps, or coming home from merely a journey of trading, because remember, these are trading people, whether on a land caravan or a portage or a long sea journey, a landtaden. So they're coming home. And as they do come home, you're carrying with you, your arms are bent with the burden of gifts that you're bringing to your tribe, to your homestead. And this is what it refers to. This is the act of bringing home the bacon, so to speak, to put it in a modern terminology. So we think of this not just as bringing home those gifts, but bringing home the wisdom, bringing home the news of the world that you learned around campfires or marketplaces, maybe in what is today called Istanbul and then was known as Constantinople, or maybe in what today we would know as Marseille, because our people traded all over the place, including those places, and maybe even in North America and beyond, and along the Silk Road, and along the portages to the east. So let us think of this as we chant AR. And just as This represented Elhaz, the rune of life, the rune of sanctuary. The other side of that is, when it is put this way into the ground, it is a grave marker. It is the rune of our passage from this life to another, which to the ancients was viewed as simply walking from one rune into another, one room into another room, not as finality at all, but merely the end of this earthly existence in this hanky, in this physical body. So we refer to this one simply as Calc, C-A-L-C. Calc. And here's the rune that refers to our being multidimensional beings. A very popular catchphrase in the modern New Age, but we have to realize it's really a very ancient idea, not modern at all. There actually is a very difficult to do poise in Stadura, where the stada has you with your arms pointing downward at 45 degrees. The torso and the thighs are straight, and you're on a soft surface, it assumes, such as sand or peat. And the lower legs are raised up like this in a meditative posture stance. And of course, it's also very athletic. A lot of them are indeed difficult to hold or maintain. And so AO is, however, also representing the fact that the person is tied in and bringing in the energy from the starry realm and bringing in energy from the earth. And indeed, when people stand upon a sacred ground, it is quite common to stand in Isa, in a straight line, straight position, and to picture the top of the head opening up to Mundalfori's realm, to the starry sky, to the realm. And of course, we think of Ukko, the sky god, as well, in the Finnish pantheon, and also bringing in the energies of the earth. Ukko, here we go, Akka's realm, Akka in the Finnish tradition, and of course, Frigga's realm in the Norse tradition. So we're tying ourselves in with both because we are in this intermediary between these dimensions. We're always connected to both at the same time. The cosmic influences, where else do we see this? In what other form of divination do we see this? Well, we see it also in astrology, where they're assuming all these subtle influences from planets and stars. So this concept goes far beyond our own tradition into many other places. So again, we refer to this one as Eo. And of course, to live in a very dark environment, as our people did, dark much of the year, well, you had to have illumination. And how was this provided? Well, in the days before modern windows or glass was invented, people would put oilskins over openings in the walls of their houses. There would be very small openings. You didn't want to let too much in because it was difficult to insulate and no way really to keep the bugs out unless you used a very finely woven mesh, which they did do, made of the weavings of reeds. But even then, it didn't keep all of it out. It kept a lot of it out. But over those openings, you would put something in this shape. You would have a nail here, a wooden wall here, and these flaps of parchment that would be placed over it that would let the light in, but keep the wind out. If it wasn't, let's say, a day where you wanted to keep it up, maybe it's 45 degrees, you would let some light in, and you have your fire going inside. So it worked out very nice. If it was really, really cold, you might cover this up completely. And so this let in the illumination from outside. It's often portrayed this way, and this is one of the signifiers for the letter D, one of the symbols for that. So we know it as Dageo. Dageo. Now, as with many of our runes, we have the outer signification of the illumination coming into the dwelling, but it also refers to the spiritual illumination. We know the gods and goddesses as the shining ones. They were always associated with light. Himdokar was portrayed as Vithias, the whitest of the Aesir, he who guards the rainbow bridge. So we thought of them as glowing. If we saw them, we'd expect them to be slightly shining. So we also refer to them as, in modern terminology, the shining ones. So what do? They illuminate us with the spiritual essence of their higher thought and their higher mind, which they share with our minds. So this refers also then not just to physical illumination, but to spiritual illumination. And of course, in life, we put out all this effort. We have the elements of wind, rain, water, sun, etc., and the soil, making our plants. And what we do with our plants to bring them home to our village, to our families, well, we harvest them. So what happens when we harvest things? Let's say we're bringing home a tray of fruits from our orchard. We have pears and apples growing there. Maybe we have other aspects of the harvest, nuts that we're bringing home at the same time. Well, it's an occasion for joy, the joy of the harvest. In fact, there's a first harvest festival, Frefaxi, or known in Wiccan circles and to Anglo-Saxons in the British Isles as Lammas, and known in the Norse tradition as Freifaxi. So what is happening at this time of year? The first harvest and then second harvest, which we know then later is Kekri, the final harvest where the fish are smoked and salted and put away for the winter. The meats have been smoked and salted and hung up in the rafters of the basement for the idea of the smokehouse continued into modern times. I remember seeing one in rural Georgia where the walls were completely blackened. There was a fire pit in the middle, and you had all the hooks where hams would be hung. So these traditions carried over for thousands of years. Well, it would be Wunjo, because what this brings is joy, the joy of abundance and the joy of sustenance coming into the community. Now, how would this symbol stand for that? Well, again, this is where the runes are ideograms. This is a person with their arm extended, holding a basket. And on the basket, if you think of the basket as being horizontal to the frame of the body, the vertical torso of the body, the legs of the body, and being anchored, let's say, at your waist, resting against the waist, would be the fruits and nuts of the harvest, maybe the sheaves of grain. They're all coming into you this way. So this is the origin of this signifier of joy, Wenjo. There's even a modern, very nice contemplative space music symphony by a modern space composer called Jean Serrie, S-E-R-R-I-E, I believe of Atlantic, Georgia. He may originally be from Holland, I'm not sure. The name sounds Dutch. And the title of it is Wunjo, and it celebrates the energy of the different runes. Wunjo. Now again, I ask you to use your imagination, as some of these are indeed a bit symbolic. And these are symbolic quite often of meditative postures and so on. So imagine, if you will, that you're standing and you're holding one arm like this, with your palm open to catch the sun coming at you at a steep angle, let's say in the afternoon. Your other arm is pointed toward the earth. So you're channeling in the light. It's reaching one side of your face. And you're at the same time tying yourself into the earth through the soles of your feet and through your open fingers on the outstretched hand pointing toward the earth through your straight arm. This is the nature of this rune called simply Ach. Now, I did, in this case, say it by breathing it, but the short answer would be, the name of the rune would be Ach, but if I breathe it, it would be Ach. I mentioned earlier the idea of standing somewhere, opening the top of the head to the elements above, picturing the top of the head as a tree branching out into the heavens. And Himin, H-I-M-I-N-N, is the origin of the English word heaven. Of course, that word is from Old Norse. And then your feet are anchored in the earth. But what else does anchoredness represent? This sense of stability. A couple of other meanings that it was used as. For one thing, as a pole, a sighting pole that would be used to mark the edges of your property in the ancient world. So this was called Issa, I-S-S-A. And why? This, of course, would also stand for the letter I. What else would Issa represent? And doesn't it have an amazing resemblance? And some versions of the rune, it was simply called Ice, I-S, because it did represent the icicle hanging down, a symbol of winter, stability, matter in stasis. So some of these represented physical states of being. So we have matter in stasis, state of being of Issa. We have also the sighting pole. So this represents stability. And if we look, again, this represents stability. Because as you're stabilizing yourself here, standing here in Ak, this represents rootedness and stability. So this is rootedness and stability that you are creating by tying yourself to the elements, bringing in the sun and tying yourself to the earth. And here, it is simply the rootedness and stability of three things: the icicle hanging down, the bare trunk of the tree in winter, and the person standing rooted in all things and tying the elements of sky and land together. Issa. And what is one of the other elements that we must have? We, of course, think of the Chinese idea of all these elements, or the Greek elements, such as fire, earth, and air, water. Well, here's the element of fire. Now, again, let's think back to Yera, the rune of the fire bricks, which are holding it in the wall, and think of the greater idea of the fire bract holding the fire as symbolizing fire. And this is the useful fire, of course, which cooks our food and gives light and warmth within the cottage in the days before electricity or the burning of oils for lamps and so on. So how would we know this? We know this is Kaun or Kaunaz. I will be saying Kaunaz, K-A-U-N-A-Z, in remembering this very important element, the useful and warming fire. But this can also be the fire of purpose, the fire of inspiration. So again, the runes have a metaphysical, when you see them cast especially, and physical property to them. Now, of course, we mentioned the boundary poles, marking your property. We mentioned inheritance. So how would you mark, oh, this is Sven's property, or this is Ake's property? How do we know where Ake and his family live? This is Brigitta's shop. How do we know it's Brigitta's shop? Well, she has this in front 2 saplings bent over, tied together with thongs or nails or wooden pegs. These tied well into the earth, long poles, and across the top it might say, this is the land of so-and-so, whichever family it is, the Organsons, whatever it is, whoever they are. And so what would this rune then represent? And of course, this is the rune for the letter O. So we pronounce this Othalaz, O-T-H-A-L-A-Z. It could also be called Odil or Othal in the different dialects and different languages that are across the great arc of Nordic culture in the ancient world. So we think of this as not just our physical inheritance, but as the inheritance of culture, of wisdom. So don't let your kids get their culture from one of these. Let them get it from you, from stories you tell at bedtime and information that you share around the dinner table. That's what this represents. Othalas. Now, just as the gods speak to us and we feel their presence in our lives, their relevance in our lives, their sacredness in the rune Ansuz, so we hear their breath in the wind. We hear their breath presaging the coming of the enlivening rains and the waters that it brings in the storm, and the chanting of the storm as it goes through the forests when we still had forests. And that sacred sound we learn to make also, which is the enlivening voice, the sacred sound, the word as the carrier of information. And all of the runes are represented by this rune in that sense, because they are all the sound as the carrier of information. And in what other pagan traditions do we have this concept, which is, of course, later co-opted, as all things were, by the Semitic mythologies? We have logos, the word as the carrier of information to our cousins in the Greek world, in the classical world there. And to us, this is osa. And we pronounce this a bit differently. We almost do it in a whisper, because this is the whisper of life, of meaning, of that which is to some extent subliminal. Osa. And here we have the rune of opening. This phonetically would be a diphthong, Ng. And we represent it as such as ing or ingvas. And why would this represent Ng ingvas? Well, the rune of opening. What does this opening mean? Like the diaphragm of a camera, which would open to let in more light, or what our pupils do in our own eyes. This is how we would, for instance, sight upon the North Star or the full moon, place our hands over it thusly in a meditative gesture, and pull the light into ourselves, into our inner vision, into our souls. And indeed, I challenge any of you to do this on the full moon, or if you're in a particularly bright area where you can actually see the stars quite well, pick the star that you really resonate with. The North Star is kind of convenient because of its angle, but one that's at a decent angle, and see if you can pull the light of that star in. And if you pull this in 9 times as you inhale, you will see a dark shadow breaking loose from the moon and coming towards you. And this is the emanation of Dishvaseson, of the black sun, at the center of our multiverse, what modern astronomers got to know, several thousand years after our ancestors knew about it and placed it on their petroglyphs. And that is the fire of the black sun the Glyphs. That's how it came in, through the rune of opening, Ingwas. So this could be an opening of opportunity, an opening of insight, an opening as you went forth on your journey. Something would open for you, an open on your way forward, or an opening as you navigate through the obstacles of life. Ingwas, or the sound, ing, or ng. Now, in the human life, in the life of this ancient culture that I speak to you of now, just as in modern times, we have monuments. Many of them, sadly, have been torn down by the Marxists and others in recent years, just as the Red Guards in China did in their country, sadly. But still, humans always leave marks that are not to be deteriorated by time, whether it's at Karnak in Brittany, or at Stonehenge, or at Newgrange in Ireland, or at the many strangely placed lentils or trilithons which dot the countryside in Finland, or some of the standing stones in Scotland. You would find these. And this is the marker of the sighting stone. Often they would look for a stone which had a notch in the top naturally, or they would make the stone to sight with the first rays of the sun breaking through at winter solstice or at summer solstice, marking the seasons. But also, the sighting stone, or in the ancient world, stone was stein in some languages, stein, or stan. So we know this rune as stan, S-T-A-N. And the fruits and flowers of the harvest that we mentioned earlier would be placed here, thanking the gods and goddesses for their bounty at the time of the harvest. The thought was, yes, they would remain there. Maybe the birds would come and peck at them. Often they would leave it alone, because the fruits and flowers placed there, the gods and goddesses took the spiritual essence of the grains, the sheaves of grain, the fruits, the nuts that may be placed there, as an offering to them for the bounty of the world. So we know this sacred space as Stan, the observation stone. Stan. And this rune we know as Querth, in Anglo-Saxon, and a couple of different ways to say it. We can say it Querth. But this is the rune also we know as Sumbul, S-U-M-B-U-L. And what does Sumbul represent? I'm sure many of you who follow our traditions have seen the horn, which was cut off, the bull's horn, and used to hold mead or wine or whatever you happen to be drinking at the moment, especially for a ritual offering. So at the beginning of the year, and this is where the New Year's resolution came from, you would have the ritual of Sumbul. You built a ritual fire, and this is the end of the 12 days of Yule. And this ritual fire marking the transition into that new year, you would boast, holding it in your left hand, of that which you did well during the prior year, your accomplishments. Maybe you built that chicken coop. Maybe you started, to put it in modern sense, that new website. Maybe you launched that new business. Maybe you, after long years of working carefully with your learning challenged son or daughter, got them through high school. Kudos to you, Then you have a drink of it. And then you would pass it to your other hand and hold it in the direction of your community, towards your fellows on your side. And then you would pass it to one of them to do the same ritual with the same horn. In a day when we didn't worry about communicable diseases, we knew all the people around us, and they were steady people, not promiscuous and of no bad habits, and not known to carry things that we worry about catching. They were our kinsfolk, our neighbors. And This would be promising what you're going to do for the next year. This next year, I'm going to clear the next 20 hectares. During this next year, I'm going to salt my fish and make a great journey to the seaport in the Bay of Biscay and sell it. This next year, I'm going to bring hides and come back with vats of wine from France. Something you're going to do, something big you're going to accomplish. Or maybe, hey, I'm going to learn a new language. I'm going to lose 15 pounds, whatever it is, to put it in a modern context. This was the origin of the New Year's resolution. And symbol is this signaling, this sharing of your plans and your accomplishments with your fellow men, with your significant others. So we can either say Querth or symbol. Both are correct to chant as well. Symbol. Or you could say Querth. And finally, we have one that's very simple to say, but very complex in meaning. And this is the rune Gar. Gar represents the ordering of the landscape into its right divisions, the proper divisions between things and people, so that each is in their own patchwork quilt of humanity and their own patchwork quilt of meaning and cultures. And we can trade and we can live beside each other in mutual respect and peace. This doesn't argue against that at all. It simply observes the right ordering things in our lives. As I think the American poet, I believe it was Robert Frost, said, good fences make good neighbors. And he was right. Gar. Gar. This is the last and final of the 33 runes. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad to have been able to share this with you. This sacred lore from the North. Please find your own sacred traditions, your own sacred alphabet from whatever area you are from. Many words or letters of the alphabet are meant to be chanted. There are sacred scripts, I'm sure, in many other traditions. I know that's the case in Sanskrit, in the Hindu tradition. Don't try to be ours. Don't try to be us. We won't try to be you. Stand for and signify the best in your own people, and we'll try to do the same. And we appreciate you joining us for us to share this wisdom of the North with you.
Thank you so much for that, Georg. I mean, I wish we had more time today, but next time I want to get into some of the debunking about what people say about the runes. People have these books written about just random things about this means this means this, and when you break it down, it's much more straightforward, because the ancient world, it's not that it was an easier life, as we all know, but it was a simpler, more straightforward. It was not so complicated with all the different mechanisms that we have today. So I look forward to getting into this more.
Well, that's the danger of popularity and success, as our ways gain popularity. Unfortunately, some people trying to make a quick buck come along and try to corrupt them or overlay them with meanings, which you talk to somebody on a homestead in Norway 1,000 years ago, that are you feeling okay today? I had no idea what you were talking about, Well,
I remember the first time I was looking to present just to our training sessions a little bit about one of the runes, my own research, and he picked apart everything I found and said, nope, none of this is right. And I said, so everything online is mostly just garbage. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can kind of provide a counterbalance here with what we just presented.
I agree. I will get into this more, and I think making some guided runic meditations might be a fantastic thing to offer people as well.
We'll have to do that. And also, at some point in the future, maybe we'll do a rune casting and see what the future of the country is when you're here. And we'll do one in early December. Sure, that'll be fun. Well, I hope it'll be fun. Who knows? We'll see what we find out. What the Sisters of Fate have to share with us, we'll find out at that time. Thank you all for joining us. And go with the gods.
Go with the gods. Thank you for joining us on Shamanic Voices. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, share, follow us on social media. Every click helps us with this project as we try to share with the world the customs passed down in the ancient Scandinavian tradition for over 8,000 years. We hope you enjoyed our podcast today, presenting the meaning of the runes and hearing the power that they hold within. Thank you, Georg, for sharing with us today what it means to breathe the runes after 40 years of practice. Don't forget to check out our website, teutonichealing.com, where you can explore more about what it is that we do, contact us for a session, or send us your questions to have answered. Next episode, join us as we continue diving into our sacred lore and discuss concepts and terminology from within. See you next time on Shamanic Voices. Go with the gods.